What is the former deputy commander of U.S. Special Operations Central doing in Ukraine? Jack Murphy sits down with retired Marine Colonel Andrew Milburn to find out why he's joined the fight and why you probably shouldn't call him a foreign fighter. This is Military Matters. This episode is brought to you by Tecto Gear, TEKTOGEAR.com, a Portland, Maine-based tactical knife company. The knives are created by the CNC process to provide the best precision, functionality, and beauty. The Tecto Gear knives won't cost a half month's rent either. Today, Tecto Gear is giving 15% off the entire purchase. Go to TEKTOGEAR.com. Use the discount code STRIPES. That's STRIPES. Go to tectogear.com and use discount code STRIPES and save 15% off your entire purchase. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
In this episode, we return to the fight in Ukraine. The fight has not stopped and casualties mount on both sides. Much of Ukraine is barely recognizable from its pre-war days, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. The war has called out to many people outside of Ukraine. From all over the world, volunteers have offered their services and skills to help repel Russian forces, and in their own way try to foster a path to peace or victory. Not all volunteers are the same, though. We've heard of war tourists hoping to bolster their social media by exploiting a war, and of military veterans with experience, but not the kind that's required in this kind of war. But then there are also very qualified volunteers with skills and knowledge that instantly make them valuable assets to the Ukrainian war effort. Jack Murphy brings us an interview with one such volunteer who's taken it upon himself to use his decades of special operations experience and know-how as a United States Marine to help the people of Ukraine win this war. Jack Murphy.
Apologies for being out of the loop for a little while. I got COVID and that was not fun, but I'm back. I'm here, healthy, thankfully. And I was really happy to reconnect with my buddy Andrew. I've interviewed him several times in the past, usually over too many glasses of scotch. We end up kind of staggering away. He's a really interesting guy. Born in Hong Kong, raised in the United Kingdom, immigrated to the United States, and joined the Marine Corps and had a really fascinating, extensive 30-year career in the Marine Corps, deploying all over the world from Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. Really, I mean, almost like he has a lot of living history in him. From his experiences all over the world in these different conflict zones. And he wrote about them in a book and a memoir called When the Tempest Gathers, which is really cool. And I hope you guys will check it out. But for this episode, we have a different type of discussion, a more sober type of discussion about Ukraine, because Andrew's adventures are not quite over yet. We went over to Ukraine as a journalist and ended up sticking around as I couldn't even call him an activist. Exactly what we would call him is something we'll have a conversation about in the interview. But he is now training Ukrainian soldiers with his own independent group that he set up called the Mozart Group. So, I mean, he's also a news item because of that. He has been called a foreign fighter in the Atlantic for doing what he does over there. And that's a charge that he disputes, something that we'll get into in the interview. So let's go ahead and jump into it at this point. I started off asking Andrew how the hell he ended up in Ukraine and on this wild adventure.
Yeah, actually, Jack, as you probably remember, or maybe you don't because we drank a few beers that night, but we met in Old Town Alexandria. And I think I was en route at the time. I was going to come over here as a freelance journalist and freelance under the auspices of Task and Purpose, which meant that they had first dibs on my articles, but they paid for my travel to and from and paid my expenses, which was very good of them. But I got over here. I wrote my obligatory 4 or 5 articles, to get which it was, and And, during that time, I started to feel as though what I was doing was quite trivial. Don't get me wrong. I think writing and reporting on this war is critical, and I applaud journalists who do so. But perhaps my reach from task and purpose didn't have quite the gravitas, that you do, Jack. And so, there was that sense of being dissatisfied about simply reporting on the war, and at the same time, I had friends out here. I won't pretend to have a deep history in Ukraine, but I have been out here a number of times training Ukrainian military guys or teaching them staff planning in the Special Operations Forces. Prior to that, Marines, as long ago as 2005, and I just watching them in extremis as they were, defending their countries, homes and families behind them. Remember, this was beginning of March when it really looked likely, even among the most optimistic of us, that Ukraine would fall quite rapidly. In fact, it seemed almost inconceivable that that would not happen. And so, at the same time, I was getting requests for help with training. There was an undercurrent of opinion among those I spoke to that I represented U.S. government, and the more that I denied that was the case, the more they believed it. And there was a handful of us here. And, I couldn't exactly explain how we came together, but we did. And we started to provide training to them. And it was a drop in the bucket, but the intangible benefits became readily apparent. There was a sense of, hey, the U.S. is here. They're helping us. And I know that sounds a little grandiose, but remember, I'm not pretending to have changed the war effort. I'm just saying that was the perception. And then, once we got up and running, someone came with the bright idea of calling us the Mozart Group, I suppose as a counterpoint to the Wagner Group. Although I have reservations about that simply because we're nothing like the Wagner Group. It was a catchy brand. It caught on, and it seemed to attract other recruits, quality guys. And that's, on that point, I realized I have to be really careful about a couple of things. One is, we are not mercenaries. We are not foreign fighters. We are not the Ukrainian Legion. There is nothing in what we do that runs counter to U.S. policy with reference to Ukraine. The only difference is that we are in the country and U.S. government personnel are not, although the State Department is moving back in. But my point is, and this is why I was a little incensed about that Atlantic article, Jack, was that being termed a foreign fighter, it carries connotations. In fact, it carries a very clear definition under the Neutrality Act. You and I are both, actually, you're not a retiree. You're way too young. But I'm a retiree. I still get paid by the U.S. government. And so there's ramifications there. But there's ramifications, too, about the credibility of this organization. We're not here to get our gun on. As I've mentioned, we're here to support, train, and expedite the equipping of units who are in combat.
So could you tell us a little bit about, how this training takes place? Like you were telling me a little bit before we started about how you kind of show up towards the front lines, and some of the soldiers who are there come back off the front lines, and you do put them through like a mini training course. Yeah.
So now remember, when we stood this up, the Russians were actually in the suburbs of Kiev. And so we stood up in the Kiev, and where I was staying in my hotel, and I hasten to add, I was staying in a hotel. It's not like I was living in a foxhole or anything. I wasn't, but nevertheless, the windows of my hotel were shaking from Russian artillery at night. Now that gives you an idea, first of all, of how far removed from the guys actually in the trenches or in buildings under fire were. But it also made me feel great empathy for them. 14-hour bombardment, and then they're waiting in the cellars for the first Russian soldiers to come down the stairs so they can kill them. I mean, it was a very, the battle to defend Kiev was it's an untold story, really, because journalists weren't there for obvious reasons. Remember, a couple had been killed, and the Ukrainians were very skittish about letting any more journalists anywhere near the front. But yeah, it was a very visceral event by all accounts. And the guys defending Kiev at that point were largely untrained. They were territorial defense volunteers, a lot of whom were students, had simply been given a weapon and go to the front. In fact, one guy we spoke to who came back for our training, who had given weapons training, couldn't work out how to work safety catch on an AK-47, which is, is a pesky thing. It's still designed. So eventually his platoon commander just handed him a bag of grenades and said, work with these as best you can. He was delighted to do so. So anyway, so that was the beginning. I'm getting to your point. We would rotate guys through training that we did in Kiev, and then they would go back to the front line. And it was a very simple, zero their weapons, basic marksmanship and moving, shooting, and individual movement, and a little bit of mount, CQB, because that's the fighting they were doing. So it was tailored for their level and what they had to do. Now, as the front pushed back to the east and southeast, we really, there was still a core trained guys in Kiev who were then going to the front. But also we wanted to give training to units that were actually on the front, because they have a regeneration problem. As, for instance, Mariupol, as the garrison looks ready to fall there or not. I won't say fall, as the guys undoubtedly will fight to the death in Mariupol. The Ukrainian staff are looking at replacing a whole brigade of guys. And so they're standing up 3 battalions here in Zaporizhia, brand new guys with a cadre of about 10% experienced volunteers. And those guys need training to, you can imagine it. Imagine how much the average Marine or soldier has to go through before he even gets to advanced training. Here they have about 6 weeks. That's what we've been told. We've got 6 weeks to prepare guys to go into combat. And so, rather than have them come back away from the line, because even while they're going through training, if something happens that the Russians break through, they're going to find themselves fighting. So we've got to go as near as the front as we will be allowed to go. We are allowed nearer than other foreigners are. We're pulled in, they let us go up into the security zone, which is an extraordinary phrase for the area behind the front. And that's where we do the training. And then we do this kind of basic training, right? Getting them up to speed, 6 weeks. Previously, we were doing 5-day blocks of training for guys who could be pulled off the line for that long. Then we put them back in. A lot of that was refresher training, enhancement, but this is going to be from scratch. At the same time, we're doing specialist training for, javelin gunners, Stinger operators. By the way, any of your listeners want to come out and teach Stinger how to fire the Stinger missile. As you and I both know, sadly, in the Marines and the Army, the 88 guys have been given rather lackluster. It's not one of the sexiest branches. Here, it is these guys are eulogized. There's so few of them, and they're the ones who are single-handed, really making it dangerous for Russian aircraft to fly, and they need more training. The theory is that we don't want to disrupt operations by pulling them off the line too far, and this kind of brings into question U.S. policy of saying we can't go into Ukraine. I'm not questioning policy anymore, but what I'm saying is this feeling of, okay, hey, we'll train Ukrainians in Poland. Now, I know they've done that with some artillery guys, and good on them. That's great. But Ukrainian soft guys are like, hell no, we're not going to Poland. We're not going to have our wives and families between us and the enemy. What are you kidding me? We're not going to leave our units for that long. And so I would argue that we as the Mozart Group are executing U.S. foreign policy. It's simply on Ukrainian soil in a manner that suits Ukrainians.
It sounds like, you're basically running like what we would have called a mobile training team, or MTT.
Yeah, that's exactly what we call that, actually.
And how many guys do you have in your group? Like, who are these cats? Are these like your old Marine Corps buddies that showed up?
No. The parochial checks. Very few of them are actually Marines. I'm a joint guy and combined and all of that. We've got a handful of Marines, a couple of MARSOC guys, got a Marine infantry colonel actually coming in. Got a couple of force recon guys too. We've also got Army Green Berets. Got a French a soft guy, Irish, New Zealander, and a couple of Brits. And a group of Slovakian medics who are doing extraordinary things, have done extraordinary things in Iraq and Syria. In fact, when I was out there, and they're not only doing training, but they're helping evacuate casualties, doing casualty care in between, that critical point between the casualty collection point and the nearest roll-free hospital. So quite an eclectic group. And, I want to claim ownership of all of them. They've joined on to us, I think, probably because maybe we have the brand and they know that we have access to Ukrainian stock. The actual numbers can vary between, 25 to, we estimate that, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have as many as 50 trainers in here if we count our EOD guys at any given time.
And so you're running, you have the guys that are going up to the front and training guys out there. But you said you're also running like a sort of basic training course.
Well, yeah, actually, the basic training course is in one of the training notes in behind the front line. I mean, it's a 6-week course that takes an entire battalion. All right, so battalions here are small. It's about 350 to 450 guys through from when we say basic training, I'm talking weapons manipulation, basic marksmanship, all of that through collective skills as a company, and then as a battalion. Yet to evolve, but something that we've been asked to do is not just the training, but also advising and assisting. That doesn't mean, again, get our guys going shoulder to shoulder into combat with the Russians, but it does mean providing assistance for casualty evacuation, providing assistance at battalion and company tactical operations center, helping them integrate fires and just run a thought.
What's it like training guys who are in this sort of situation who they're in combat? It's not like you're training someone for combat; they're in combat. And are they able to actually, articulate what they're seeing on the front lines, and you're able to kind of like adapt to your training towards, the situation that they're going to be right back into?
Yeah, very, very much so. So first of all, Jack, one thing that's consistently impressed me here is no one says, "Hey, I'm a veteran. What the fuck are you going to tell me?" They come out and they say, "Hey, we need help with this or that," from what they've learned. Well, the Russians are doing X. How do we counter that? Everything from Russian sniper TTPs to the fact that to how they lead their attacks with heavy electronic attack barrage to responding with counter battery fire, to use the drones, all of those things. And it's learning. A lot of it's learning for us. We're not the experts. A lot of this is talking through stuff with them. And I would say we learn as much from them as they do from us, because they're doing some things that are way beyond, honestly, how small unit tactics in the Marine Corps or the Army as they are now. They understand. Remember, we talked about the kill chain. They understand the kill chain. They understand they have to sense and find the enemy before he finds them.
At this point, Andrew had to greet some people who just showed up to work at the Mozart Group. So he disappeared from the interview for about 15 minutes before returning. So Andrew is a very busy guy these days, but I'm grateful that he was able to take some time out of his day to speak with us. So let's get back to Andrew.
But it's kind of interesting. So 9 Slovakian medics just arrived, and I don't often get to say that. But these guys are awesome. I think I mentioned that I met them in Iraq back in 2016. They subsequently did combat evacuations for CTS and for the SDF. For your listeners, the CTS are the almost Ukrainian Iraqi Special Operations Forces. And so during the Battle of Mosul, they were doing evacuations from the CTS casualty collection point back to the aid stations and then on to the nearest roll free. I mean, you can imagine that was pretty hazardous. And then on the other side of the border, they were doing the same thing for the SDF, the Syrian Defense Forces, who are having great success against Islamic State. So these guys did that for 2 to 3 years, and now they're here in Ukraine, offering to do the same thing. The first thing we're having them do is just help us train Ukrainians in TCCC, because that's a critical gap in their training. They do some basic medical training, but they're losing too many guys at point of injury or on their casualty collection point who are bleeding out. When it's a question of just very basic training and basic equipment. So we're hoping to stop that, because Ukrainians can't afford to lose casualties at this rate. And that's not being well publicized. I don't want to be too dire about it, but it's very important that we help them to do that.
Yeah, there has been, or at least there's a perception that there's a bit of a news blackout when it comes to, say, Ukrainian casualties. And we're seeing very little over here, I think, about, what the situation is for the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian military. And you have to wonder if they're not kind of hanging by a thread. I was just wondering if you have any perspective on that being there.
There is it's too much of a stretch to say hanging by a thread. They're certainly not doing that. Their sense of resilience, their sense of confidence is not misplaced. Certainly it's hard to imagine the Russians making much headway here. However, there is serious concern about how much, at what cost it's going to take to evict Russians from Ukrainian soil. They are very cagey, closed-lipped about their casualties. So the things that we are hearing, though, are more than anecdotal. Remember, we're talking, the fact that we are having to train essentially 3 battalions, and from Ukrainian soft, I think speaks a little to the fact that they are taking heavy casualties. It's no secret that, they're going to lose almost a brigade of guys in Mariupol. We know there are 600 wounded alone in the steel plant there. And it's, I'm trying to be optimistic here, but it's really hard to be about what lies in store for them. You may be tracking some of the push coming from my organization, the Mozart Group, to get logistics drones into country so that these guys can be resupplied. We've worked out a plan with Ukrainian soft to do that. It is absolutely feasible to do that. Russian ADA systems would be relatively easy to overwhelm, especially if you're using cheap drones as decoys and using the right routes around their ADA system. But the flash to bang is just, it takes too long, right, for the United States to provide stuff where it's needed. And that isn't me. I don't think that's me being overly critical. It's one thing to say that the U.S. is throwing, millions of dollars at this problem, but it's another to say, another claim, which would be a false claim, to say that the United States is making every effort to ensure that the most critical capabilities get to the units that need it on time. That is not happening. And the problem is that when I make that second point, the people who can simply make the first point accuse me of being, a defeatist or being overly critical of this administration. As you well know, I criticize dumb policy. It doesn't matter. I'm as bipartisan as you, Jack.
I think part of the problem is that we have a no boots on the ground policy because, obviously we don't want American soldiers engaged in a conflict with uniformed Russian military and the consequences that could come from that. And so, I think you're seeing things from a boots on the ground perspective that our government isn't. And do you think it's time to put, if not soldiers, contractors as observers?
Contractors, yeah, absolutely. Soldiers maybe as observers, by all means. Yeah, I think that's, but you don't even need to do that. What I'm saying is use us. And this is the disconnect time that I find perhaps most frustrating. I'm not, listen, I understand, people can accuse me of not thinking strategically, and that does annoy me because actually I think there's a very important strategic question here, which is, what do we allow to stand as the United States? That's, I get real politics, but this is also a question of real politics. If you continually allow yourself to be so scared of escalation that you do not stick up for a sovereign country that is certainly a friend, if not an ally, and really make a determined effort to help that country, then what good does does having the most powerful army in the world do you? Now, remember what I said though. I'm not. I mean, I spent 31 years in the military. I'm fairly level-headed most of the time. So I'm not suggesting we put U.S. troops in mass on the ground. I am suggesting, though, that we use whatever assets we have on the ground, like my organization, maybe even put civilians in here, contractors, to ensure that stuff gets into the hands of those who need it the most. But I can tell you, I mean, I'm persona non grata with Special Operations Command Europe, even though I served in that command, even though I was chief of plans at UCOM for 2 years. SOCCENT contacts me when they need stuff. But if we need that stuff from them, something to help the Ukrainians, like Switchblade trainers, I'm talking the console, not guys, or we want to trace critical equipment that's supposedly coming in, like Switchblade 600. I get stiff arms because I think there's some fear that I'm just determined to escalate Third World War, the Third World War, and that I find nonsensical. We're all here to execute foreign policy. Use every tool you have at hand. I am plausible deniability. It's very easy for the U.S. government to say, hey, the Mozart Group is not any part of us. And that is absolutely true. And I'd be the first to say that. But on the other hand, we're willing to help the U.S. government. We want to help the U.S. government. So to stiff arm us makes no sense.
You mentioned the Switchblade drones. I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, I mean, what are the things that you think the Ukrainian soldiers up on the front lines, what do they need? Be it equipment or tactics or something strategic or whatever the case may be. What do you think those guys need right now to win?
They need long-range precision fires. Now, notice I'm using capabilities rather than the platforms. However, when I say long-range precision fires, drones, long-distance drones, Type 2, Type 3 drones with a strike capability are infinitely, I've got to be careful what I say here. I'm going to insult the artillery guys. I don't mean to, but much more effective for a number of reasons than artillery by itself. And I say that because there's been much fanfare about the M777 coming into the country. That is awesome. That is great. It makes great headlines. However, no one really looked at how the Ukraine military is structured. The thing about artillery is effective when there's centralized control, decentralized execution, right? We do decentralized execution in the States through forward observers and JTACs with close air support. They don't have those here. At least it's not a habit of action the way it is in the United States. So you're going to have a very centralized artillery that's going to be useful for counter battery fires. It's going to be useful when the handful of long-range drones pick up targets, but it's not going to have a game-changing, war-changing effect unless you start training guys to be observers on the ground. Now, drones are a little bit different. All right, right now the TV2s they were potentially a war winner, but the Turkey only supplied a limited number. Estimates vary between 20 and 50. Number have been shot down. Who knows how many they have left? But all of them were kept at Ukraine Drone Command, which is fairly high up in their chain. Now think about if they had units across the board had Type 2 strike drones. Now you've extended your reach and also longer range ISR. So you can spot the Russians before they can see you. Very, very simple. It's all about extending the kill chain. Those two things would be a game changer. Long range logistics drones. Okay, that's something that we in the West didn't think of because that's not the way that we supply logistics. We move Iron Mountain. The Ukrainians don't do that. They move penny packets to the units that need it most, and a lot of those units are cut off by Russian forces. And so drones would be a great capability to do that. By that I mean any drone with a range beyond 60 kilometers that can carry over 20 kilograms of weight. Now, the Ukrainians have some workarounds. They're turning their drones, like even the crappy Chinese DJIs, into strike weapons by affixing gimbals, and RPG-7. But that's going to have, a limited effect. It's nothing like TV2 that can, I've seen two of them. I've seen the remnants. Let me put it this way: the remnants of a Russian armored column after two TV2s just ripped it apart, eviscerated it, and so you're not going to get that through even NLAWs and javelins. And you think about those weapon systems that have been much vaunted and lauded in the press, and yes, they absolutely gave Ukrainian infantry an edge. But every one of those weapon systems requires the operator to get within the weapons engagement zone of the enemy, and that's suboptimal in the 21st century. You have long-range strike drones that can destroy armor, or even Switchblade 600. You don't have to worry about that. So far, no sign of the Switchblade 600. They've been the unicorns of this war, by the way. A lot of media attention, but I have yet to find a Ukrainian soldier who has seen one.
Ideal for fishing, especially if one needs to quickly cut a line, the Romeo folding knife comes with a light carbon fiber handle with an amazing grip and a D2 steel blade. Fair warning, the blade is extremely sharp and cuts through the toughest materials. What makes it simple is the flipper tab. The knife pops open for quick use all in one single motion. Go to tektogear.com today. Tektogear is giving 15% off the entire purchase. Use discount code STRIPES. That's STRIPES. Go to tektogear.com and use discount code STRIPES and save 15% off your entire purchase.
What are the perceptions that the Ukrainians are having of the Russian military? I mean, obviously negative. I think we get that. But I was wondering if you had any observations through the guys you're coming in contact with of some of the specifics about how the Russian military is performing based on their observations in combat with them, observations during reconnaissance, or maybe even those rare times when POWs are taken.
Yeah, so interestingly, the only time where there was very close quarters fighting was in northern Kiev, in Irpin and Bucha. And in Bucha, the brigade that came into Bucha, of course, notorious for the war crimes they committed. But they, aside from that, were a better class of soldier. They were an airborne brigade. And man for man, the Ukrainians, had defeated them. And the Ukrainians fielded, as I said, mostly territorial defense guys. So you're talking the best of the Russian army against these untrained guys, and the Ukrainians kick their ass. So there's a good deal of contempt for the Russian soldier, and they've seen too. They'll hit elite T-72 in a column, and the hatches will fly open up and down the column, and Russians will try to surrender. Will surrender.
Oh wow!
And to that point, though, the Ukrainians have not capitalized on this, and I wish I had a handful of really savvy information operations warriors here, because that would be a good way to. I think one thing the Ukrainians should be doing absolutely right now is inducing the Russians to surrender. Russian soldiers in the field, discouraging the Russians in Russia and Belarus, if indeed the rumors about a column now heading for Ukraine from Belarus are true, discouraging them or encouraging them to turn on their officers or refuse orders. I mean, that has happened, but it hasn't happened enough. The Ukrainians are very resilient. They're tough fighters, but I would argue they don't have to fight the Russians as much as they are doing right now. Just sending them photos of some of the things we've seen, it's multiple tanks destroyed, Russian bodies strewn in the street, left there by their comrades. You name it. This is a disposable. These soldiers very clearly are disposable to their regime. You don't have to twist the message here to be able to broadcast it back to the Russian people and those soldiers waiting to come in. How could they possibly have high morale? Faced with that, the Russians have lost, by the most conservative estimates, which is UK MOD, that's United Kingdom, not Ukraine, 15,000 dead in 2 months. I mean, those are, when you factor in the ratio to the soldiers that came into the country, those are Second World War rates on the Eastern Front. That's no exaggeration. The Russians lost that many in 10 years in Afghanistan. And that's the most concerted of them. It's how could they possibly have high morale? So I think, Ukrainians need to build on that. They have absolute hatred and contempt for what the Russians are doing here. The stories that are making the Western press are, I fear, kind of the tip of the iceberg. We're hearing stories that are not anecdotal, and it seems to be widespread. The stories of rape and just slaughter of civilians. I myself have seen, in Bucha, I saw the mass graves. I was there a day after the Russians left, not mass graves, the bodies laid out. Talked to the locals who said the Russians had just, dragged people out from their homes, killed them for the fun of it. You remember in Iraq and Afghanistan, certainly too many civilians were killed at checkpoints, right, by soldiers and Marines who, they're scared, et cetera, and their commanders had given them the wrong message. But it wasn't deliberate acts. Those weren't deliberate acts of homicide. They were just kind of negligence, and it was poor discipline. Here, I can tell you it is a very, very deliberate approach to killing civilians, not just with artillery, but with direct fire too. We passed car after car on the way to Bucha with civilians, families, you name it, who were dead, clearly shot by the Russians when there could be no question of them being military vehicles.
Yeah, I read an article this morning in the Daily Beast about, I think in Donetsk, there's basically a dump where they dump the Russian soldiers' bodies. And they said there's thousands in there stacked like 9 feet tall. And and they're just kind of officially listed as missing. Like they're saying it's easier to just list them as missing than acknowledge their deaths. So they're just, it's literally like a body dump.
In Bucha and Irpin, the bodies were lying out in the street still. And, I said to one of the Ukrainian commanders, I said, hey, why don't you guys clean these guys up? And he said, no, we're going to let the Russians come and get them. We tried to explain, hey, look, it's going to be a health hazard. Of course, Ukrainians realized that, and they buried them, a day or two later. But it's also an indication just of how angry the Ukrainians are. To say they feel betrayed, not just by the invasion, but I'll give you a quick story that may put this, give it context. I was talking to a girl the other day, and she stayed in Kiev, even when the Russians were in the northern suburbs. She stayed because her parents, who had grown up in the Soviet era, had said, you know what, things won't be that bad. This will be just like another government. These are they're our relatives. It's just, this is like a coup at home. And so the fact that it is so different than a coup, that it's, the Russians are treating them, are acting just as abominably as they did in Syria. To you and me, there's no ethical difference, right? And there's no killing civilians is killing civilians. But the Ukrainians, they are shocked that is the Russians doing it to them.
Yeah. And I mean, the repercussions of this are going to reverberate for decades. And I mean, as you pointed out, we're just kind of seeing the tip of the iceberg right now. What do you see in the coming months? How do you see this conflict unfolding? Where do you think it's going next?
That's a really good question, Jack. And I've got to tell you, I'm the only one in Twitterland who can't give you a certain answer. I don't, the Ukrainians will push them back. There's no doubt about that. But here's what concerns me. I think it's going to be a long, bloody war of attrition. And that's why I continue to bang the drum about game-changing weapons. Because when we talk culminating points, the Russians kind of reached their culminating point outside Kiev, but then they've got fresh troops in the fight. They've got troops that are of better quality. They've learned some lessons. And they're much better in the defense than they are in the offense. They can mass artillery. One of the, you asked me what Ukrainians thought about the Russians. Well, they've got a tremendous respect for their artillery. And I won't say fear, but I can tell you one of the reasons why the Foreign Legion here is not in the front line is because a lot of guys who were in Iraq and Afghanistan just couldn't believe what it was like being under an artillery barrage, and they've lost a couple of guys now, even though they weren't right up on the line, and they're now kind of behind the lines. And so the Ukrainians are aware of that, Russians are very good at that. They've sowed reams of mines. I mean, they've littered this country with UXO aside from that. But and so it's hard to envision a quick victory. The Ukrainians are superb at small unit tactics, but you probably haven't read too much about brigade maneuvers here, right? With combined arms. That's because they lack experience in that area. You know, I'd love to see a fleet of U.S. advisors or advisors come in and do that. If Mozart Group grows, you know, we can do that. We are offering to help train and advise on integration of combined arms. But these are not things that come naturally in this country. It's simply because, you know, they have other strengths. I mean, you and I can go down a list of things that the U.S. military is not good at, right? So, and I'm just being honest about. So that's what concerns me. I'm not answering your question because I don't know for sure. I can tell you this, that there will not be an end to this war as far as the Ukrainians are concerned while Russian troops are on Ukrainian soil and while Putin is in power.
So you see it stretching on as a kind of a painful war of attrition, at least for the foreseeable future.
I think you know, I think the Russians are going to look for a space-saving way out as their casualties mount. I'm not sure the Ukrainians will accept those terms as long as, you know, even with Russian troops in the Donbass region, I don't think that Ukrainians harbor hope of dislodging them from Crimea, but I may be wrong. You know, it's hard to, you can't underestimate the determination and resolve in this country and the anger. But it certainly, it doesn't bode well for the Russians, and it doesn't bode well for a speedy end to the war.
Any final thoughts here, Andrew, as we wrap up? Anything that I kind of failed to ask or cover?
I would like to say, hey, if any of your listeners are interested in the Mozart Group, just following us or donating or even joining us, please look us up online, themozartgroup.com. We're always looking for trainers. We're looking for demining experts, EOD techs, and that's just going to be training. But that's a huge problem here right now, as I mentioned. And there's some 126,000 kilometers of what the Ukrainians call contaminated territory, which means, you know, cluster munitions, UXO, et cetera. So anyway, yeah, please check out our website. And that is pretty much it.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. I'll definitely try to spread that around. You know, I'm kind of opposed to the guys who run around overseas trying to play soldier and kind of extend 100%. That experience. But I think that this is a way that guys can capitalize on their skills and experience and kind of pass it on to people in a positive way, people who can really make use of it and save lives.
Yeah, Jack, on that point, I agree with you 100%. I just want to tell you that the guys with me are, you know, they're all, I won't say elderly, but they're all, you know, a lot of them are retirees. I mean, they've got kids, they've got families, they've already been through Iraq and Afghanistan. They're not hungry for adventure. They're just here because they want to help. And they're certainly not here to make money. I can tell you that, because we're all volunteers. We make enough to live on, and we have accommodation, but we're here for the cause, which is wider than Ukraine versus Russia, by the way. I'm tired of hearing people go, this is a civil war, or other people who don't understand, or with whom it does not resonate, that the issues involved here go much further than Russia and Ukraine. I give up hope on. You know, some people are so isolationist that you could drop an atomic bomb, and as long as that mushroom cloud didn't overshadow any part of the United States, they just wouldn't care. I have no sympathy for those people.
As I pointed out there at the end of the interview with Andrew, I'm not necessarily a big fan of American military veterans packing up their mothballed TA-50 and camis and packing them into a duffel bag and flying off to fight someone else's war. I've written quite a bit about this actually in the past. And I do have I hope my opinion comes from a place of understanding and not just like reactionary or anything like that. But I have interviewed mercenaries for quite a long time, people who have served, fought, been contractors, foreign fighters, foreign volunteers, whatever label you want to use. I have interviewed guys who served in informal capacities in places like Burma, people who got involved in or almost got involved in doing some coups in different parts of the world. These are all sorts of different types of people, and there's no one label we can just throw on them. Some are private security contractors, some are mercenaries, some are foreign volunteers. But I'm not anti-contractor in the sense of people who contract with the United States government, like let's say CIA paramilitary personnel, or even like security personnel who pull guard duty at our FOBs. I don't have any problem with these folks at all. I do kind of have an issue with the people who pack up their gear and just fly off to fight in Syria or Kurdistan, or in this case, Ukraine. And I have a couple of different reasons why. A lot of it has to do with I am a veteran myself, and now as a journalist, I write and cover veterans, and I don't like to see veterans get into trouble. I don't like to see our guys get into trouble. I don't like to see them get killed overseas. I don't like to see them wind up in prison. I don't like to see them making headlines for all of the wrong reasons. So I actively warn people when they come to me about this sort of stuff, like, hey, man, you might want to reconsider doing that. Again, there's a whole series of reasons why you don't have the legal protections if you get into trouble, if you get killed. I guess your concerns are over, but you are still leaving a burden on your friends and family. And then also, I have found with everybody I have known who goes and does this, they're all running from something, that they all have this sort of hole in their chest that they're trying to fill with something. They're in this sort of search for meaning. And, war does fill our lives with meaning and purpose, right? I think most veterans, our generation of veterans certainly understands that. And when they separate from the service, they suffer and struggle with that loss of meaning. But I don't think that this is necessarily the way to find it. And, not all foreign volunteers are bad people. Some of them absolutely are horrible people. Some of them are good people. They're just missing something from life. And they go over there trying to find it. And some of them don't come back, unfortunately, and others come back dealing with all sorts of psychological, if not physical, problems. So I really, I think Andrew and I are sort of on the same sheet of music here. If you're going to go over there and train some people or work in a hospital or do volunteer work, I recently talked to a special forces veteran who's in Ukraine, Ryan Hendrickson. I have a lot of admiration for him because he's over there with a mission, a Christian mission, doing aid work. And he's going into these recently liberated areas of Ukraine and giving traumatized civilians bags of food, bags of rice. And he's really doing good things, I think, to help people. But he's not running around pretending that he's still a soldier. And I really respect that about Ryan. And I really respect that about Andrew as well. So I hope you guys will just take all of that into consideration when you listen to this interview or you hear other stories about foreigners going over to fight wars. I mean, I understand it's sexy. It has an appeal. It has a draw. It even to this day, I've been out of the military 12 years now. And I mean, conflict still has a draw. It can pull you in. There's an aspect of it. I mean, even though it's so terrible and so horrific, there's an intoxicating nature about it that pulls people in. And I think that we all, especially those of us who are military veterans, just need to do some self-reflection on who we are and who we want to be and how we're going to relate to these conflicts. And there's a lot of ways that you can help without going and picking up a rifle. So I guess I don't want to preach to people and tell you what you need to do with your life. You're going to do what you're going to do anyway. But I would really urge you to do some self-reflection on that before you decide to go and fight someone else's war.
This episode was written by Jack Murphy and produced by Rod Rodriguez. You can follow Military Matters on Twitter at StripesMMPod. Be sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcast and save 50% on your digital subscription at stripes.com when you use promo code podcast. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
And we'll see you at the next episode. This episode is brought to you by Tektogear, TEKTOGEAR.com, a Portland, Maine-based tactical knife company. The knives are created by the CNC process to provide the best precision, functionality, and beauty. The Tektogear knives won't cost you half a month's rent either. Today, Tektogear is giving 15% off the entire purchase. Go to TEKTOGEAR.com. Use discount code STRIPES, that's STRIPES. Go to Tektogear.com and use discount code STRIPES and save 15% off your entire purchase.